Welcome to Fright Night.
Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome back. Unless you're new, then welcome for the first time. I like to make these little videos about things that I enjoy and want to share. Usually it's about film, frequently a lot of horror, and 80s and 90s throwbacks. For just films that I don't really hear as much about these days. But for this one, I'm kind of taking a break from my usual quick, spoiler-free recommendation format, even changing where I'm sitting for this one, for a general, I like this, I want to tell you all sorts of stuff about it kind of thing. So for this one, I want to talk about the Fright Night films. Actually, it's going to be 3 of them. I'm going to do at least 3 videos on this because I wanted to do a longer one that kind of covered everything in one, but it just wasn't really working out trying to make like a big half-hour video for it. So I'm just going to split this into like 3 or 4 videos because I've been a big fan of these Fright Night films for years. So there will be, of course, since it's a little bit of a different format, some spoilers in this. But before we dive in, for those of you who haven't seen these films yet, these have an aspect of like a Hitchcock film called Rear Window, I believe. But in this case, it's a teenager looking outside and being convinced that he has a vampire living next door. The official synopsis, of course, is: a teenager believes that the newcomer in his neighborhood is a vampire. He turns to an actor in a television horror show for help to deal with the undead. So he has to convince his friends of this, and he decided to enlist the help of this TV horror host because he's kind of obsessed about this and about those films that he's hosting, and he's kind of, I guess, having an issue separating that this guy is really just an actor. But anyways, I recommend this one highly, so if you haven't seen it yet and you don't want to deal with any spoilers, go ahead and check it out, then come back here and watch the rest of the video. So, for those who are still here, or ones who are returning after checking it out, here we go. Fright Night from 1985. If you ever get that question as a horror movie fan, like what's your favorite vampire film? Or especially during the hype, like when Twilight was all the rage and True Blood and all that back in the day, I always stick to this: Fright Night. Favorite vampire film, Fright Night. Favorite vampire performance, Fright Night. Favorite vampire character, it's like Jerry Dandridge from Fright Night. I actually put this vampire, Jerry Dandridge, at the top of my list, in part, of course, to how Chris Sarandon had portrayed him, but this is my favorite over any others. And I know that may sound strange, not just given the films, but you got to figure you got Stoker, Bright, Lumley, Rice. I mean, there's so many different vampires written that are very popular, but this is the one that really stuck with me. And there's just a couple of reasons why, about this vampire in particular and these films. So, for Jerry Dandridge himself, he's got a lot of charm. Quite charming, super smooth, almost flirtatious in a way, and a tad full of himself, but for a reason. I mean, he is like this apex predator who's smart and cunning and charming. Sure, he can turn monstrous and everything and transform into quite a vampiric beast, but he's more easily simply going to charm you into letting him into your home, and then he's going to suck your blood. So he can charm his way in, but he can also get strong and beastly when he needs to. I've seen other vampires in film and TV who come across as dangerous or creepy right off the bat. Something strange or dangerous is up with them, and you're always suspicious right from the start. But Jerry, while maybe seeming a bit stuck up and self-centered, he's just a charmer. You're not really going to see him as dangerous, any more dangerous than just anybody else who's kind of self-centered or narcissistic, perhaps. I think that's one of the reasons why I like this film is how they kind of built these characters in general. That even the antagonist isn't simply bad. He's tricky. Now, when we get to the other characters in this, of course, they're written similarly as well. Charlie is kind of representing us, I feel like. This average high school kid, horror movie fan, particularly these old ones which seem kind of like a parody of old Hammer titles, for instance. And his girlfriend Amy in this, I feel like the one thing her scenes really kind of bring to mind is keeping us on Charlie's side by showing how much she cares about him. Not just because of the vampire stuff, but even before all that, she really seems to care for him. As she represents this level of innocence in a way, while also becoming the focus of Jerry as she looks kind of like a reincarnation of somebody that he knew, way back in his past. Same thing with Ed. He just really ties things together. He works well with the group. So Ed, also known as Evil Ed or just Evil, this longtime friend of Charlie's who, has his back, and he can dish out the jokes and burns just as well as he can take them. But he really comes across as an outsider who's a bit misunderstood and kind of slipping out of Charlie's life a little bit as they're growing up and going through high school now. And then finally, of course, we come to Peter Vincent, vampire hunter, named after Peter Cushing and Vincent Price. He is like a version of what would be like a Hammer horror actor known as, you know, a vampire hunter in film, horror host now, and kind of like the sunset of his career in a way. Stuck in the past a bit, like kind of like stuck in his glory days and everything, but he's just an actor. So when real vampire stuff really starts to come about, he's gonna fold. He's a coward because he's just an actor. You know, he doesn't even believe in vampires, of course. So all of these characters really complement each other, both in how they're written and in how these actors actually portrayed them. They really seem to have a lot of great chemistry and a lot of heart behind all of this. Throughout the story, you know, as Charlie witnesses Jerry feeding off of a woman and Jerry getting invited into his house by Charlie's mother, you know, part of being charming, of course, and eventually attacking Charlie, you know, he's getting in over his head very, very quickly. So, of course, you know, his friends don't believe him, and he goes, you know, a bit obsessive and desperate in approaching Peter Vincent. But it's done really well, you know, even though we know as the audience that Charlie's telling the truth. You know, they never mislead us and are upfront about it. You know, seeing him struggle with having these issues slowly brings all of these characters together and pulls them in over their heads as well. Peter kind of being the first one, you know, beside Charlie, who kind of believes him, you know, having not seen Jerry's reflection. But then Amy gets kind of charmed and turned as well. Same thing with Ed. You know, Ed gets turned just by being willing to be turned at the promise of these vampire powers, so he won't feel alone or weak or be taken advantage of anymore. I mean, it's a great way to pull us not in too many directions, but just to keep everybody associated as we slowly circle everything together into this tighter and tighter package. Now, you know, there are a few that I would have liked to have seen more of. You know, there's his mother, who's, you know, pretty funny, but there's not really much going on. She's just kind of representing his parent, who works at night, and that's why she's not around most of the time. And Jerry's familiar is super interesting, but we don't really get much on him either. You know, they kind of leave him as a mystery. But this doesn't throw off the film, either him or Charlie's mother, you know. But after, you know, rewatching this so many times over the years, of course, I want to know more and more about those characters. But when it comes to having even more characters, well, that's where part 2 comes in, and we'll get to that one later. Anyways, you know, this one is laid out so well, and over the years, I've watched it several times, from VHS recorded stuff off cable, to I even used to have this one on Laserdisc. I even have it on DVD, and I've got the Blu-ray as well. Oh, and I have the 4K Blu-ray. Oh yeah, and I have this soundtrack on vinyl as well. And I have similar ones for the sequel. You know, I got my Fright Night Part 2 DVD, as well as a Fright Night Part 2 Blu-ray, which is actually a Spanish edition. It does have English track and everything, but is the only way to get Part 2 pretty much in any way, it seems like. And I even have a copy of the remake, which I'll get into in another video. So, I simply love everything about, you know, this film. I mean, these films in general, you know, the sequel and the remake even, but you know, I just love seeing, you know, Charlie seeing Jerry show up and have these suspicions, and how quickly those suspicions are proven to be true. Getting invited in by his mom and getting attacked at night. You know, there's no one to believe him. You know, Peter witnesses it, and then, you know, Ed and Amy eventually get turned, and they kind of understand what's going on. And poor Ed, you know, killed by Peter Vincent in a surprisingly heartbreaking scene, which, you know, also had some amazing effects. You know, some really great practical effects where you could see Peter's character now going from a vampire hunter actor to actually having killed a vampire. It's really a surprisingly sad scene, and a pretty gory scene as well. But, you know, we also get this really great effects shot with Jerry's familiar kind of being taken out. Kind of like this weird zombie-like turning to dust kind of death that's really disgusting and really done well. And we get big effects, big explosions with this, you know, final showdown with Jerry fully vamped out and Amy fully vamped out as well. We get a lot of suspense, thrills, a little bit of mystery there, the horror and action. All of it pays off by the end with this really great climax that wraps up the film perfectly. But Anyways, that's just me kind of gushing about Fright Night, you know, my little love letter to this movie. I hold a lot of nostalgia for this one as well, and not only do I have, you know, all of this big stack of media here about it, which I wish I'd saved that Laserdisc though. Shouldn't have ever gotten rid of that one. But you know, I got to meet Chris Sarandon about it's like a little bit over 10 years ago, I believe, and you know, super nice, great to chat with and everything. So, and since, you know, according to who, you know, people who've like commented or liked certain tweets of mine, you know, which makes me of course close personal friends now to Tom Holland himself and Luke Skywalker. You know, that's what it means on social media. If you like something or comment, you're tight now, right? Anyways, I figured, you know, it's really time for me to finally get around to making a video about this, you know, about at least these first three, you know, what it's, you know, which I've been meaning to do for a while. I just kept putting it off for a bit. But I also figured here we are at about the 2-year mark on my channel of, you know, making some, you know, reviews and recommendations. So it was a good time to start this up. I'm going to try to get the other 2 out sometime this week as well. Anyways, that's about all that I have to say about Fright Night. But what about you? You know, sound off in the comments. Do you hold this in high regard as well? Do you have that same kind of nostalgia that I do, or did you just think it was okay? I mean, for the most part, I feel like people have seen this movie have really enjoyed it. They might not put it on a level that I do, but seems to be all around a pretty enjoyable one. So anyways, like I said, pretty soon I'll be diving into Fright Night Part 2 from 1988, as well as the 2011 remake with the late Anton Yelchin and Toni Collette, Colin Farrell, and the Doctor himself, David Tennant. Not sure if I'll do that sequel remake one, Fright Night 2 New Blood, because I don't really understand what it's about, because it has some of the same characters, including Ed, who had died, and Peter Vincent's like a ghost hunter person in it, I think. I don't know. I mean, I heard it was okay, so maybe I'll track it down. But anyways, moving on, be sure to, you know, subscribe and hit that little bell icon to get notifications for when I put up that new content, and I will see you in the next one.
Welcome to Fright Night.
Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to installment number 2 from my videos about Fright Night. If you haven't watched the my initial video and need a refresher, Fright Night is my favorite vampire film, and Jerry Dandridge is my favorite vampire character in fiction in general. I had originally planned to do one big video covering the first 2 movies and the remake, but it just wasn't really going that well. It's kind of dry and it's all over the place, so I decided to split it up and do, you know, a few different ones. So for this entry, I'm going to be covering Fright Night 2 from 1988, the synopsis for which is as follows. Charlie Brewster and Peter Vincent must face more vampires out for revenge. Okay, well that was basic as hell. So let me open this up a little bit more here. Basically, Charlie is in college now and has been in therapy to deal with the aftermath of all the events from the first film. By this point, he is basically convinced that it was all in his head, that he and Peter Vincent had just confronted a serial killer, and to cope with the trauma of what they had dealt with, they kind of invented this, you know, all these vampire aspects of their story. So now he's worked through all of that, and he's able to move on with his life. You know, he's in college, even has a new girlfriend and everything. So while we are in this new situation, there are some repeats of parts of the formula that was kind of used in the first film that had worked, but not so much to distract from the story or feel like they're running out of ideas or just are repeating themselves. So for instance, we still get this, you know, a bit of that feel of the Rear Window kind of aspects, you know, that paranoia, suspecting people, and so on. This time around in a form of a woman who just came to town named Regine, who has her own little coven in the form of this brute kind of vampire, played by Brian Thompson, who feeds mainly off of bugs, kind of like how Chris Sarandon had come up with this idea in the first film to work in an apple, that maybe he was like on an evolutionary track, that he had come from fruit bats. This guy, it's like he came from, you know, regular insect-eating bats. We get this beastly one, played by John Grease, turning into something that looks almost more canine-like in a way, but is always kind of hanging on to that human side of himself still, you know, trying to hook up with women and get laid just as much as he's trying to feed off of them. We get this other really strange roller skating one that's simply just vicious, you know, kind of like a right hand of Regine. zooming in on roller skates, taking somebody out. Really kind of creepy. So we get a lot more characters with that. So anyways, like I said, Charlie has moved on, and has Peter, but now we have the issues of Charlie suspecting Regine and thinking vampires are back, while Peter is being, at the same time, being let go from his show and replaced by Regine, who is posing as a performance artist of sorts who is going to take over those hosting duties. So we still get a little bit of that repeat of Charlie needing to prove to a non-believer that vampires are real, such as his girlfriend. But this time, instead of his girlfriend being bitten like Amy was in the first film, it's Charlie himself, slowly being altered and, putting us right in the thick of everything, early on, of needing to vanquish these vampires and kind of, save himself. But we get to see a little bit more of like his transformation, and as he's slowly being kind of like disturbed by sunlight and garlic and starting to crave blood, like all these little things. So it's stuff that we didn't get to see from Amy in the first film, but we get to see some of that from Charlie in this one, and it works out pretty well. On the surface, it doesn't really sound that different, but it is. The pace is a bit different. There are more characters, of course, which I think is a great thing. And in the absence of a character like Evil Ed, who was basically putting forth like the brunt of the humor, pretty much all of the humor in the first film, except for maybe a few scenes with Charlie's mom, we mainly get it from that beastly and brute style vampires played by John Grease, who of course you may know from several films, including playing Laszlo in Real Genius and Uncle Rico in Napoleon Dynamite. And the brute one, like I said, played by Brian Thompson, who with over 100 credits on IMDb, you have seen him somewhere and you will recognize him. So they're back and forth, kind of jabs at each other, even like this playful like fighting that they're having to, brings this comedy to the forefront from them. We even get a little bit of it from Charlie's therapist, and from one of his friends who's played by the late Merrick Buttrick, who played Kirk's son in Star Trek 3, and playing, I think the character's name was Johnny in Square Pegs. So we still get those little bits of comedy in it, but it's kind of spread out over like 3 or 4 characters, with us not having Ed in this one. I feel like this one stands out to me because of the extra characters mainly. We get this changed up location as well, and swapping a few things in the formula from the first one while sticking with what worked from that first one. Along with that, we get what seems to be a bigger budget, or at least it comes across that way. We get those great practical effects again, and we get a lot more of that. We also have another really good soundtrack going on this one, and the shots are really planned out in a very engaging way. It's just really a good, fun film. To me, this is a perfect sequel, carrying over the best from the first film while not retreading too much on that material and bringing something new to this installment. And really, the only reasons why I'd really put this behind the first one, first reason is nostalgia, of course. The first one was my first introduction to these characters, so it's always going to be kind of my favorite one because of that. And the second, while this is, put together well, it's missing some heart. It's fun and spooky and sexy, etc., but something that heart just is missing. It's just not quite there. It's not a bad thing, really, but just different. If I gave the first one a 10 out of 10, for me, this is a solid 8.5. So it's definitely worth checking out. And although this is a follow-up to the first, it can be enjoyed on its own, meaning I never feel like I need to rewatch the first one before checking out the second one. It really stands on its own 2 legs, and it's just a great one to check out. And speaking of checking out, where can you check out this one? Got me. Unfortunately, the rights for this one were always kind of like a bit messed up. From what I hear, it was only even in the theaters for maybe a week or 2. But anyways, I had picked up the DVD years ago. Really great cover on this one, and it's actually kind of difficult to find this now. I think these go for anywhere from $30 to $80. I've seen the pricing all over the place. And then I got this one from Spain, the Blu-ray, which luckily does play in our region, and it does have an English track on it. This one also is somewhere around $30. Because of those rights mix up, this isn't even available on streaming anywhere that I can find, even for paid rental, which is very, very strange. But yeah, it's worth checking out. Like I said, this Blu-ray, I confirm it does work in America, and it does have English, so if you want to check it out, you can go ahead and buy one of these. But yeah, so there's a Spanish one, like I said, which I was tipped off to via a friend on Twitter, and everything works. It's region free. You can pick that one up, or maybe track down an old DVD. But you know, hopefully one day it'll be a little bit easier to check this one out rather than getting an old DVD, you know, marked up, or an expensive Blu-ray from another country. But until then, if you can find it, check it out. You know, just like you checked out my latest video here, for which I thank you for, you know, sticking around to the end. Be sure to like and subscribe, and hit that little bell icon, so you can get that notification for when I put up probably my final Fright Night video, in which I cover the 2011 remake starring Anton Yelchin, Toni Collette, Colin Farrell, and the Doctor himself, David Tennant. I say probably because I know, you know, there's Fright Night 2 New Blood from 2013, but seeing as it kept the same character names, but then changed up who they were, changed up the location, it just didn't really make much sense to me, and I turned it off after 15 minutes. Maybe I'll give it another try, give it a second chance, see if it's actually worth it, you know, but anyways, we'll see. Anyways, thanks for coming by and for sticking around to the end, and I will see you in the next one.
Welcome to Fright Night. For real.
Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to the third and final installment in my little series of love letters of sorts for the Fright Night films. If you've not seen the previous videos, a quick little catch up here. Fright Night is my favorite vampire film, with Jerry Dandridge being my favorite vampire character in fiction in general, and Sarandon's performance of that character and the balance of the cast, you know, handling Tom Holland's material the way that they did in Fright Night, made it as such for me. So I wanted to do some more kind of spoiler-filled videos, basically these little love letters just talking about these films, because even the sequel and the remake I hold with really high regard for one reason or another. So for this entry, I'll dive into the 2011 remake of Fright Night, this time around starring the late Anton Yelchin as Charlie, Christopher Mintz-Plasse as Ed, otherwise known as Evil Ed, Toni Collette as Charlie's mother. We got Colin Farrell this time taking on the role of Jerry Dandridge, and the Doctor himself, David Tennant, playing Peter Vincent. So the synopsis for this, of course, is pretty much the same thing as the first film, but we get a few things kind of changed up. One of them, of course, is a location. This is now set just outside of the Las Vegas Strip. This gives us the excuse for, you know, people in the area, you know, are going to be sleeping during the day, working at night. You know, they have some odd jobs out there because of just the nature of Las Vegas. So we get this nice change because we get that explanation of nobody is really going to think differently of somebody if they never see them during the day. Also, another really big change is with Charlie and Ed. So in this version, it's Ed who suspects Jerry of being a vampire by kind of keeping track of some disappearances that have been happening around town, and he's kind of been zeroing in on like the center of where all of that must be coming from, and sees that it's most likely Charlie's neighbor. He's also not quite as mature as Charlie, and is kind of holding on to his youth in a way, being a little bit too much into fantasy and the occult in a way that Charlie sees as kind of immature. You know, Charlie's still friends with him, but they've definitely been drifting apart, kind of slipping away a lot more than they did in, you know, the first version of the film. And of course, finally, Peter Vincent. This is one final like standout change for it, was that Peter Vincent in this iteration is a Vegas performer with a dark and macabre kind of stage show as an illusionist who dabbles in the occult. But at its core, we are, you know, sticking with Fright Night and not deviating too much, while, you know, not being so similar that we would not even have to watch this film. That'd be kind of pointless. So, as I've said in one way or another in some of the videos that I've done about different remakes, I feel that a remake can be kind of tricky to balance, you know, to try to like achieve. Basically, it needs to be, I feel like it needs to be a long enough time since the original that, you know, or maybe that original never really got to build an audience. You know, give us a reason to actually try this remake, to try to get a new audience into it. If it's too well known, if it was too successful, no matter how long ago it was, the remake's going to be compared to the original way too much, and people are going to question why was it even being remade. I also feel like you need to kind of make it different enough from the original that also makes it worth making, but not so much that it kind of makes no sense to even call it a remake. You know, you want it to be different enough to stand on its own, but not so different that you're not even able to compare it to the original. So for instance, take, you know, the videos they did about Evil Dead 2013 versus Ghostbusters 2016. For me, one of them worked great, and the other it was just kind of okay, but overall pointless and no big deal if you skipped it in favor of just rewatching the original. This film does pretty good as a remake. And this video kind of serves as a remake review as well. But, keep in mind that that's coming from me, somebody who, holds the original in such high regard that I was still able to go into this one with an open mind and really enjoy it. Because we still get this nice sense of mystery and suspense and danger happening. We get this, these touches on Ed and Charlie kind of drifting apart a little bit more and one needing to convince the other. We also get a lot of the same beats as the first film, just updated, like the effects where this time around we get some CG to either enhance certain scenes or to just replace them entirely or to do things that they just couldn't do practically. So we get a little bit more kind of thrown into this. And on top of all that, we get the action and violence and a tad bit of that comedy sprinkled on top, just like we saw in the original. But it's not perfect. My biggest issue, unfortunately, would be Jerry. If I take the direct comparisons to Chris Sarandon out of the picture and just speak about this character and how it was written and portrayed in this film, it comes down to a lack of charm. He's not being smooth. So I felt like Dandridge in the first one, we knew he was bad news, of course. That was given to us early. It was never hidden. It was never questioned. But when he's invited in that first one into Charlie's home by his mother, we see how smooth and charming he's come across and dangerous because of that. Because it kind of tells us, we know he's dangerous, we know he's up to no good, but we also know that nobody's going to believe us through all that charm, so we really are screwed. So it adds that extra layer of fright to it, not being able to get out of the situation, not being able to convince those that have kind of been charmed by him. But in this portrayal, in my opinion, he's not really coming across that way. He seems sketchy right off the bat, and Charlie's mother just isn't seeing that, and it's ridiculous that she's not. So it doesn't work as well for me. Other than that, there is still something else missing from this film. Like the characters or performers more specifically just didn't quite gel the same way. And even now I realize that I haven't even mentioned Amy. She didn't stand out to me, and there doesn't seem to be too much of a reason to go into any detail about the portrayal of that character. It just wasn't really written as well in this one, or didn't come together. Anyways, back to what I was saying. The cast didn't really seem to complement each other or have that same heart as the original. That lack of heart is something brought up about the sequel as well, which I'd put in my previous video, that had come up while tweeting with the director about this. He has this little comment about what he felt about the remake and how, Jerry just isn't charming, but he knows that Colin Farrell is charming and he can do it. And all these actors are more than capable, but just something wasn't in the script or in this production to bring that along. But even with all that little complaint being said, they changed things up enough that they were able to make this film its own thing. They kept with the core of the original. It still got me on board with Charlie, like the Charlie and Ed dynamic. Though not as much as the first film. And of course there's Peter Vincent. So probably the biggest change here that still I was okay with, of course, was being a David Tennant fan, mainly due to Doctor Who. I was excited to see that he was coming into this to take over that Peter Vincent role. And I think he did a really great job. He's still an entertainer, still having these flaws, still being pursued by Charlie as, being seen as like this expert. And he brought some great comedy into it, especially with his partner in it, them just going at each other's throats. I didn't feel like they just kind of plugged him in and just put a little bit of a change on him. I mean, he actually came across really well. Because after all, these days I don't think like horror hosts are quite as popular as they used to be when the original Fright Night came out. So, we get different iterations here and there. We get like some, there's like a few of them still around, but it's just not as popular because people have so many other avenues for entertainment. So I feel like if he was just another horror host again, the audience might not really connect with Peter Vincent quite as much. So make him an occult-inspired illusionist, almost like this Chris Angel kind of qualities kind of thrown in with his style in a way. And that really worked for me. All in all, we do have a very good film here, I feel like, a very good remake. Not as good as the Evil Dead remake, I would say. But, when it comes to remakes, but definitely better than Ghostbusters or RoboCop or even, because even in this one, Chris Sarandon himself even shows up to do a quick little cameo, which is really cool to see. So if I gave that first film a 10 and I gave the sequel an 8.5, this one I'd give like a 7.5. Definitely worth checking out. And speaking of checking out, nope. Don't turn it off yet. This isn't really the end of it. Speaking of checking out, checking out the sequel, Fright Night 2 New Blood, was a mistake. But since, it is in the Fright Night world, I finally checked it out. So here's some quick notes, since overall I really didn't enjoy this one, and I'm not recommending that you check this one out, because most important, Fright Night 2 New Blood is not a sequel. It's even though it says part 2, it still has Ed in it. He's still alive. None of these characters have experienced vampires before. Peter Vincent is kind of like this ghost hunter dude bro kind of guy, and they're on a school trip to Romania for some reason. This is just another remake, only 2 years after the other remake. So I'm not sure why they called it part 2. If anything, they should have just renamed all of the characters and just called it Fright Night New Blood. Let it just be another entry in the Fright Night series. It doesn't need to be a direct sequel or a remake, just let it be its own thing. And that way I could at least accept it as another movie and just kind of keep it separate from the others. However, even if they did all of that and made it like its own separate vampire movie, it still wouldn't work for me. The story really failed to engage me. Ed, even if not calling him Ed, if they had changed all the characters, he's just more of an asshole in this one. They changed up the lore of Elizabeth Bathory and Vlad the Impaler as being one and the same as Jerry Dandridge, played by Jamie Murray, who I really enjoyed in Warehouse 13 and in Defiance, but here I just don't think she had any good material. And, I don't know if it's really an acting issue or a script issue, but, the story, the setting, the characters, the acting, nothing about this worked for me. I did really appreciate that they tried to change some things up, and there were a handful of cool shots maybe, but it just didn't do it for me. And 45 minutes in, I was ready to quit again, figuring I made it further than my first time 10 years ago. I'd only lasted about 12 minutes or so, but I stuck with it. And the last 20 minutes of this film just felt like the longest in cinematic history. And the thing is, I don't like doing this. I don't like going negative on a film, because I know every film takes a lot of hard work to put together, and get it completed at all is just a miracle. Sometimes things don't work out for one reason or another. It's it could be something with the script, something with studio interference, something about their shooting conditions, something could affect it. But even with that, most films still have their fan base, and in this case, I'm just not one of them. I prefer to talk about films I enjoy and I want to recommend, but this one, I just can't recommend Fright Night 2 New Blood. But anyways, to wrap this one up, to wrap up all three of these videos. First one, definitely my favorite, of course. Great story, cast, pacing, everything. It's all balanced perfectly, in my opinion. Favorite vampire film, favorite vampire character. I've seen it several times and owned several editions, and even owning the soundtrack on vinyl. The second one is great. It's a great follow-up. Not the same as the first, not quite as good. It doesn't really have the heart or gel quite as well, but it is still a lot of fun and more than worth checking out if you can somehow track down a copy of it. Especially it's fun because of that expanded antagonist cast. And this remake, very good. It's a very good remake. Again, not as good as like the Evil Dead remake, I would say, but they made some changes, updated it, and though it didn't really have the heart and some things about Jerry I didn't really care for, they still presented a nice new version for a new audience while making it different enough that super fan like me can still go to it and enjoy. And Fright Night 2 New Blood, I've seen better film on teeth. So, anyways, that kind of concludes my little series of love letters here for the Fright Night films, of which from here on out I'm only really going to acknowledge the existence of the first three. But what about you? Sound off in the comments. Have you seen all of these, including New Blood? What are your thoughts on the franchise as a whole, especially this remake? And if you were so unfortunate, New Blood, I mean, it's fine if you liked it. I'm sure that it does have its fans out there, but it just didn't do it for me. But that's about all that I have for this one. And thanks for coming by and checking out all three of these videos, and for sticking around to the end, as all that stuff really does help out quite a bit. And be sure to do the whole like, subscribe, and hit that little bell icon to get notifications for when I put up some new content. And I will see you in the next one.